What if your husband wasn't who you thought he was? What if the man who stood beside you, smiled at you, shared your bed and dreams, was wearing a mask all along? Not the kind you can see, touch, or take off with your hands, but a mask made of flesh, illusion, and silence. What if, at the stroke of midnight, the person you gave your heart to shed his human skin and revealed something else? Something ancient, something hidden, something terrifying. These are not the tales you hear around the dinner table or read in neatly bound storybooks. These are the tales that live in whispers, carried by wind and memory, passed down by grandmothers who knew to light a fire and lock the doors before speaking. These are the stories buried in the soil of old villages, folk stories drenched in shadow, secret, and superstition. In African folklore, nothing is ever quite what it seems. The bush can smile at you. The river can speak. And the hunter, the one with sharp eyes and silent steps, can sometimes be hunting more than animals. Folktales from across the continent often warn of this, that trust is a powerful thing, and to give it blindly can invite something unimaginable. A creature, a curse, or worse, truth. Tonight's tale is one of those stories. A dark one. And though it speaks of love and marriage, it is not a love story. It is a story of what happens when the veil between what is seen and unseen is lifted, if only for a moment, at the dead of night. A story where a woman's life is forever changed not by a spell, but by revelation. There's something timeless and chilling about tales like this. Because they don't just entertain, they warn. They whisper old truths into new ears. They say, look twice. Listen deeper. Don't fall for the surface of a man, for it may be no more than borrowed skin. And when you hear bones crack in the dark or the soft sound of skin slipping from flesh, don't pretend it's just the wind. Because some things come alive only when we stop pretending. This story, like many African folk stories, isn't just about fear. It's about the shape of fear. It's about what hides in plain sight. In villages where the line between the spiritual and the physical is thin, where transformation is a breath away, and where ancestors still speak through dreams, such stories are not simply fiction. They are warnings dressed in metaphor. You'll hear about a woman who thought she had married a man, a strong, brave hunter beloved by all. But what she married was something else entirely. She learned that the body can lie and love can be deceived. And she learned it not with words, but with her eyes at the hour when the world sleeps and spirits walk. So before we enter the world of this tale, I ask you, do you believe in transformation? Not the poetic kind, but the dark, flesh-tearing, bone-shifting kind? Do you believe that someone can wear another skin? That love can be the perfect hiding place? Because this tale is not for the faint-hearted. It's for those who dare to wonder what lives behind the faces we trust. If stories like this ignite your curiosity, if you love the strange, the eerie, the whispered, and the forgotten, then you're in the right place. Like, comment, and subscribe to join this journey through Africa's darkest tales and deepest mysteries. Each story is a key. Each whisper a doorway. Now sit back. Listen closely. Because once you hear what she saw at midnight, you'll never forget it. Beyond the winding paths and thick brambles, past the last known markers of the familiar world, there lies a village untouched by time. It is nestled in the folds of green hills and shadowed by mountains that rise like the backs of sleeping beasts. A place where the trees whisper in a tongue the wind dares not translate. This is not a village found on maps, nor in the stories told proudly in open daylight. This is a village whose name is spoken only in hushed tones and moonlight. The people of this village live simple lives, humble and rhythmic, like the steady beat of a drum played by hands that remember. Clay huts with thatched roofs line the dusty roads. Children chase each other barefoot through narrow paths, laughter floating into the air like songbirds. Fires burn gently at night, illuminating faces etched with the wisdom of generations. Food is shared. Stories are sacred. And tradition is not just respected, it is law. Here time does not flow in minutes or hours. It flows in cycles, in harvests, in full moons, in the way smoke rises from the mountain and settles again. In every season there are rituals. Some to bless, some to protect, some to keep the old things sleeping. The people know their land. They know the soil, the seasons, and the signs. But above all they know caution. Because although they are a community bound by love and trust, they live beside something wild. Something untamed. The forest that looms behind the village is more than just trees. It is another world. One that breathes differently. One that watches. Outsiders are rare. And when they come, the air changes. The elders gather. The women pull their children close. It's not that they are unkind, no. They offer food, shelter, even a smile. But behind their eyes is a curtain of suspicion, thin but unmoving. For they believe, as their ancestors did, that the forest is home to many things. And not all who walk out of it come with human intentions. In whispers, children speak of the Okwechi, shapeshifters said to wear the skin of man but born of beast, spirit, or shadow. They walk like you, speak like you, even love like you. But at night, under the cloak of darkness, their truth reveals itself. Some say their eyes flicker like the eyes of wolves. Others speak of the smell, the scent of wet earth and something old. The elders say the Okwechi do not just transform, they mimic. They learn. They wait. So the villagers learn to look deeper. They believe that truth is never on the surface. That a kind smile can mask a serpent's tongue. That love, when given too quickly, can lead to ruin. They do not trust the forest, and they certainly do not trust what the forest sends. And yet, every few years someone does come. A traveler. A wanderer. Or like in the tale we're unraveling now, a hunter. Tall, strong, quiet. With the scent of the wild and the silence of someone who has seen many deaths. The hunter was unlike anyone the village had known. He came during the rains, helped repair fallen huts, hunted food when the rivers were too high to fish. The people, cautious as always, watched him with the same stillness they offered the moon. And slowly they began to accept him. But not everyone was convinced. The oldest among them, a woman whose eyes had seen both war and peace, muttered often that the mountain breathes when he walks. That he moved too silently for a man, and his shadow sometimes lingered longer than his body. The children ignored her. The young women swooned. And one young woman in particular fell, not only for his strength or skill, but for the quiet sadness in his eyes. Love in this village is both blessing and risk. It binds two souls, yes, but it also weaves them into the village's soul. It means trust, legacy, and vulnerability. So when she chose him, this man from the wild, it was not just a marriage. It was a thread woven into something larger. A union of worlds. But the village, for all its smiles and dances, held its breath. Because everyone in that place, no matter how joyful, carried a secret. Some secrets were soft like forgotten names. Others were heavier like promises made in blood. And in this village, when night falls, secrets do not sleep. They walk. This was the setting for the tale that would soon unravel. A quiet, guarded village. A mysterious hunter. A love that bloomed like fire in dry grass. And a darkness that waited, patient, silent, watching. Because in places like these, folklore isn't just story. It's survival. Amina had always been the heart of the village. With her soft smile and eyes that held the gentleness of river light, she moved through the days as if she were born from morning dew and lullabies. People often said her beauty was the kind that didn't shout, it whispered. It wasn't just her face that caught the eye, but her spirit. She carried kindness in her fingertips and laughter in her breath. But beneath that warmth, Amina held a longing, a yearning that even she couldn't quite name. She was young, no more than 19 seasons old, but her soul felt older, restless. While others were content with village life, tending crops, sharing stories around the fire, and following customs like footsteps carved in stone, Amina often stood at the edge of the fields, eyes drifting toward the horizon, wondering what lay beyond the mountains. To her, the world outside wasn't frightening, it was full of songs she hadn't heard yet, skies she hadn't seen, and maybe, just maybe, love that felt like something more than arranged smiles and polite meetings. Her family was humble. They worked the land like everyone else, harvesting yams and weaving mats, but they were also respected for their closeness to the village elders. Her grandfather, now long buried, had once been the keeper of old stories, tales not found in songs, but passed through whispers by firelight. Her mother carried that torch now, often sitting near the elders as they spoke of ancient things. Creatures of the woods that wore human skin, spirits of the river that traded truth for dreams, and the old rule, never trust what arrives from the forest without leaving footprints behind. Amina heard these stories her whole life. She listened politely, even repeated them to younger children, but deep down she always believed they were warnings soaked in fear, not truth. She had never seen anything strange in the forest, never felt the wind whisper secrets, never caught a shadow moving where it shouldn't. To her, the world was full of possibilities, not monsters. The elders, she thought, simply didn't understand yearning the way she did. So when the hunter arrived, everything changed. No one knew where he had come from. He appeared at the village's edge as if carried by the wind, wrapped in dark leathers and silence. His face was chiseled like stone, with eyes that seemed older than the hills, and scars that whispered of battles and forgotten places. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his voice was low, deep, and carried a weight that made people listen. He offered meat from his hunts, repaired broken traps, and fixed fences without being asked. He moved with the ease of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. To the villagers he was both useful and unsettling. To Amina he was a dream stitched together from her most private desires. She was drawn to him instantly, not because he was handsome, though he was, but because of the way he stood apart, untouched by routine, unchained by expectation. He was mystery in human form, and for a girl who had spent her life looking toward the mountains, he felt like the first step into the unknown. They spoke first when she brought him water. He looked at her not like a stranger but like someone who'd already seen her in a dream, and as days turned to weeks they spoke more. She asked about the places he had seen, the lands beyond the forest. He gave her fragments, never full stories, always watching her with those dark eyes that didn't blink enough. But Amina didn't mind. In his silences she found poetry. In his glances, promises. The elders were uneasy. They saw the way she looked at him and the way he seemed to always be watching the forest, listening for something beyond human ears. Her mother warned her gently at first, then more firmly. "He is not of this place," she said one night. "His soul doesn't sit right with the trees." But Amina brushed it off. "You just don't want me to leave," she said. "You think the world is dangerous because you've never stepped beyond the forest." Her mother's face darkened as if old wounds had been reopened. Some things come from the world to find what they've lost. And some things wear love like a mask. Still, Amina didn't listen. She saw in him not danger but salvation, from boredom, from sameness, from a life spent waiting for a dream that might never come. She loved him with the full force of her heart. And when he asked to marry her under the new moon, she said yes without hesitation, even though he asked that their wedding be held at night in silence with no drummers and no feast. Only a fire and vows spoken between them. She said yes. And the village, though tense, agreed. For when love takes root, it is harder than ironwood to cut down. But beneath her joy a shadow stirred. Not outside. Not in the forest. But inside her, like a drumbeat she could not place. Like a name she did not know yet but had once been hers. Because love, true love, may open doors. But so too can it awaken old things. And Amina, though she didn't yet know it, was standing at the edge of a story far older than her dreams. The hunter had become a silent part of village life, like a shadow always on the periphery. No one knew where he came from. He had simply appeared one day at the edge of the forest with his carved bow and strange foreign eyes. He wasn't loud or boastful like many men in the village. He didn't join in drinking sessions, nor did he stay for evening tales around the fire. Yet, his presence loomed large and undeniable, like a figure woven into the background of every day. What made him unforgettable was his skill. He could bring down beasts that most hunters in Yumu only whispered about: silver antelope, the rare red fox, even the massive iron-tusked boar that had terrorized nearby farms for years. He hunted quietly without fanfare, and always gave a portion of his game to the elders. He never asked for payment, nor did he smile when they thanked him. He only nodded, eyes hidden beneath the shadow of his hood. People accepted him because they needed his strength, but their gratitude was mingled with unease. He rarely spoke. When he did, his voice was low and careful, like he was choosing each word from a well of secrets. The children called him the forest's ghost, when adults weren't listening. Some claimed they saw him disappear between trees without sound. Others swore he never left footprints. But none of these rumors reached Amina, not in a way that mattered. All she saw was the man who made her heart flutter, the man who made her feel like she was finally standing on the edge of the life she'd always dreamed of. She had never been afraid of the unknown. Where others saw danger, Amina saw wonder. So, when the hunter came to her one morning, a bundle of red-stemmed flowers in his calloused hands, and asked her to walk with him to the river, she didn't hesitate. His words that day were still few, but every sentence felt like a key unlocking something ancient and hidden inside her. "I want you," he said. "Not just for today but for all seasons." The wind paused in the trees. Amina blinked. She looked into his eyes, so deep, so strange, filled with something that didn't belong to this world, and she nodded without thinking. "Yes," she whispered. Word of the proposal spread quickly. Some rejoiced. Others murmured. Amina's mother was silent, her face pale beneath the weight of warnings she had hoped wouldn't come true. The elders exchanged quiet glances. And still the wedding plans began. The ceremony was simple but sacred. It took place under the moon as the hunter had requested. He said the stars would be witnesses enough. There were no drums, no chants, no feasting, just a circle of family, a woven mat of sacred palm, and a clay pot of river water to seal the union. The hunter wore white linen, wrapped tightly across his broad shoulders. Amina glowed, her hair braided with shells, her smile bright enough to light the path ahead. She did not notice that no birds sang that night, nor that the trees remained still, watching. When they joined hands, the air shifted. A cold wind rushed through the village, sending goosebumps across the skin of everyone present. One elder looked toward the forest and muttered a prayer. A child cried without knowing why. But Amina was lost in her happiness. She didn't see the flicker in the hunter's eyes when the river water touched his skin. She didn't notice how his lips pressed tight when the elder chanted the binding words. She was too busy imagining the life they would build together. After the ceremony, they moved into a small hut near the edge of the forest. It was the hunter's request, to live close to the trees. Amina agreed, thinking it romantic. She imagined waking up each day to birdsong, the smell of wild herbs, and a husband who would one day open up, share his past, and teach her all the things she longed to know about the world beyond. But he never did. Even as her husband, the hunter remained a mystery. He left early in the morning and returned after dark. He didn't like to be touched during the day, and he never removed his leather necklace, an odd charm shaped like a claw. He smiled, but only faintly. He kissed her, but it felt like a ritual. She told herself it was just his way, that some men carry their pain like a second skin. At night, he would stare at the moon through the open roof, unmoving, as if remembering something far away. Amina sometimes found him awake in the middle of the night, sitting by the fire pit, whispering to the flames in a tongue she couldn't understand. When she asked what he was saying, he would simply say, "Just old memories." Still, she loved him. And love, when rooted deep, can make a person blind to even the clearest signs. She cooked for him, waited for his stories, touched his hand when he would let her. And when the village whispered, she ignored them. She married a shadow, one woman said. Not even the birds sing near their hut, murmured another. They say he doesn't eat the food she cooks, said a third. But Amina closed her ears. She chose to believe that the hunter was simply misunderstood. That love could soften even the hardest stone. And yet, some part of her knew something wasn't right. Some part of her watched him closely, every night, wondering what he would do when the world was asleep. And it was on the 7th night of their marriage, under a full moon, that she would finally understand. It was then, just past midnight, that she woke to an empty bed, to the creak of floorboards, and to the sound of something wet being peeled away. She crept quietly to the corner of the hut, peering through a gap in the reed walls. What she saw froze the breath in her lungs. There, by the firelight, stood her husband, but not as she knew him. His skin lay on the ground like a discarded cloak, and in its place was a creature tall and sinewy, its body glistening with scales that shimmered like obsidian, its eyes glowing faintly like dying coals. It stretched, letting out a sound like wind through hollow bones. Then it turned toward the fire and began to chant. Amina clutched her chest, tears falling silently down her cheeks. She wanted to scream, to run, to confront him. But something held her back. Some ancient fear, the kind that lives in the bones of those who've heard the old stories. She had married a man, but not a human. And as the creature began to hum a song only the forest seemed to understand, Amina realized she had stepped into a tale much darker than any she had been warned about. Amina's new life in the hunter's cabin began with quiet joy. Nestled at the edge of the forest, the small wooden home offered a sense of escape from the village's constant watchfulness. The chirping of crickets and the rustle of the trees at night were like lullabies to her ears. She would often sit by the small window, watching the moonlight pour over the trees while she waited for her husband to return from the forest. Their life felt new, different, and, at first, magical. Their early nights as husband and wife were tender, though cloaked in silence. The hunter spoke in few words, but he held her like she was the only thing anchoring him to the earth. There were nights when he would sit beside her, brushing his hand against hers, and his eyes would soften just enough to let warmth slip through. Amina believed she had made the right choice. Despite his mystery, she felt needed, chosen, and wrapped in the arms of something powerful. But it wasn't long before that dream began to shift. At first it was small things. He would return late, long after the sun had set, his clothes damp and smelling of river water, though there was no river nearby. Sometimes she'd find tiny scratches on his chest or strange marks on his arms that weren't from any animal she knew. When she asked, he would smile faintly and say, "The forest tests us all." Then came the sounds. Amina would lie in bed after he claimed to sleep, and she'd hear the floor creak under his weight. Sometimes she'd hear the door close softly, though he never told her where he was going. He always returned just before dawn, slipping into bed with skin that felt too cold for someone coming from outside. She told herself it was stress from the hunt, that maybe he needed time alone. Men were complex, weren't they? And he had lived alone for so long, perhaps he wasn't used to sharing his world. But her heart began to pound a little harder every time he disappeared. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One evening she prepared his favorite meal, smoked goat stew with yam, but he barely touched it. He only sniffed it, pushed the plate aside, and murmured something about not being hungry. Later, when he thought she wasn't watching, she saw him slip outside with something wrapped in cloth. She waited for the sound of footsteps to fade, then opened the bundle he'd left near the door. Inside were feathers, black, slick and shining like oil, and bones that looked far too clean to be natural. Her breath caught. These weren't the remains of animals meant for food. That night, he didn't return until the stars had begun to fade. When she asked him where he had gone, he looked past her, eyes unfocused. "Dreams," he said simply before turning his back to her and falling into a deep, unnatural sleep. Amina's unease grew with each passing night. She started waking up at strange hours, feeling a chill in the room even though the fire still burned. On more than one occasion she saw shadows moving outside, tall and thin, dancing across the window like smoke. Once she heard him muttering in his sleep, but the words were in a language her ears didn't understand. Another night she woke to find him standing at the edge of their bed, his eyes wide open, glowing faintly in the dark, his mouth slightly open as if listening to something far away. She was terrified, but also determined. She had married this man whatever he was. She needed to understand him. Love couldn't exist in mystery forever. So she began to pay closer attention. She feigned sleep, watching him slip out quietly. She marked the door with ash to see if he truly left, and by morning, her mark was always smeared. She sprinkled flour near the threshold. His footprints returned, but not alone. Something else moved with him. Something that walked on claws. One evening as he left, she decided to follow him. She wrapped herself in her darkest shawl and moved silently behind him, careful to stay hidden between the trees. The moonlight guided her path, but the deeper they went, the more the trees seemed to close in, bending toward each other as though whispering secrets. The night sounds stopped. No owls. No crickets. Just the crunch of leaves beneath her bare feet and the fading sound of her husband ahead. He moved like a shadow, faster than any man she had seen, but she followed. Eventually, they reached a clearing she didn't recognize, an ancient place where the trees formed a circle around a moss-covered stone. The air shimmered strangely, like heat rising from the earth. She crouched behind a thick tree and watched as her husband stepped into the center. Then he began to hum, a deep, low vibration that didn't sound human. He raised his arms to the sky and slowly, methodically, he removed his tunic. Then his belt. Then his skin. Amina's breath caught. What stood before her now wasn't a man. It was tall, sinewy, covered in dark scales. Its face was long and narrow, with golden eyes that pulsed like living fire. Faint wings, like those of a bat, unfolded from its back and its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of sharp, glistening teeth. The creature bent low to the earth, pressing its clawed hand against the moss-covered stone. It whispered words Amina couldn't understand, but the stone responded, glowing briefly, then pulsing once like a heartbeat. Then silence. The creature stood again and for a moment, it turned its head, directly toward the trees. Toward her. She ducked, her heart slamming against her ribs, hands clamped over her mouth. Had it seen her? Had it smelled her? After what felt like hours, she dared to peek again. The creature was gone. The clearing was empty. She ran. Branches tore at her arms, roots snagged her ankles, but she didn't stop. She didn't stop until she was back at the cabin, trembling, covered in dirt and sweat. She locked the door, curled into a corner, and wept silently until the sky turned gray. When the hunter returned just before sunrise, his footsteps soft and careful, he paused at the door. Inside, Amina wiped her tears and forced herself to breathe normally. He entered without a word and slipped beneath the blankets. As she lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, her mind raced. Who, or what, had she married? What ancient force had stepped into her life wearing a man's skin? And most importantly, what was he hiding, and why had he chosen her? The night air was thicker than usual. It wrapped around Amina like a second skin as she crept along the forest path, staying low, silent, cautious. Her heart pounded in her chest like a war drum, each beat louder than her footsteps. She kept her eyes on the flicker of movement ahead, her husband, walking as though the trees parted just for him. He hadn't noticed her. Not yet. He moved differently at night. It wasn't the deliberate, quiet gait of a hunter. It was more fluid. Like he didn't quite belong to the same world under moonlight. Amina followed, every step fueled by a need to understand the truth. No more whispers. No more fear. Tonight she would see what he was hiding. They traveled deep into the forest, deeper than she had ever dared to go. The familiar sounds of nocturnal animals faded, replaced by an eerie silence that made her skin crawl. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ahead he stopped. Before him stood an enormous tree, unlike any Amina had ever seen. Its trunk was twisted, ancient, wide enough to house a family inside. The bark shimmered faintly, like it had absorbed the light of 1,000 moons. Its roots curled above the ground like the claws of a beast, and in its hollow heart pulsed a faint red glow, like a living ember. Amina crouched behind a thick patch of brush, eyes locked on the man she thought she knew. He knelt in front of the tree and began to hum. A low, guttural sound that vibrated in her bones. It was haunting, melodic yet primal. His hands moved slowly over his chest, then to his neck. And then she saw it. He began to peel away his skin. Not like removing clothes. No. This was deliberate, ritualistic. His fingers gripped the edge of his jaw, and with impossible precision, he peeled the flesh away as though unzipping a coat. It came off smoothly, shoulders, arms, chest, falling to the forest floor with a soft, wet sound. The air shifted as the transformation completed, the skin lying in a pile beside him. Amina stared, frozen. What stood in the skin's place was no man. The creature was tall, too tall, with limbs that bent slightly wrong. Its body was covered in thick, forest-colored hide, dark and coarse like bark mixed with fur. Long arms ended in clawed fingers that seemed to twitch with unnatural energy. Its head was elongated, with no visible nose, and its eyes glowed a dull, golden hue that pulsed softly in the dark. It looked ancient, as though it had stepped out from a time before men walked the earth. Amina clutched her mouth, stifling a scream. The creature lifted its head and sniffed the air. It turned slowly, scanning the trees, ears twitching. Amina didn't move. She didn't breathe. Her body felt like stone. Her heartbeat roared in her ears, and still she willed herself to be invisible. The creature took a step toward the brush where she hid. Another. Amina squeezed her eyes shut. Please don't see me. Please don't smell me. Then it paused. Its head tilted slightly as if listening. Then it turned away, walking back toward the great tree. It reached out a hand, touching the bark. The red glow in the tree flared once, then dimmed, pulsing in rhythm with the creature's breath. It began to chant. Not in words Amina understood, but in a language that made her spine ache to hear. The tree responded with low groans, like ancient wood shifting. For a moment the air smelled of blood and salt. And then, without warning, the creature knelt and began to dig at the earth beside the roots. Amina, still hidden, watched as it unearthed something wrapped in rotting cloth. A skull. Human. The creature cradled it with care. Reverence. Like it was a child. Her stomach turned. This was no ordinary beast. It wasn't just a monster. It was something older. Something cursed. Something that wore human skin as a mask. As if to confirm her worst thoughts, the creature began to stretch its limbs, shuddering as it breathed in the moonlight. It let out a soft, eerie cry, a sound full of longing and loneliness. Not rage. Not hunger. Sorrow. And somehow that made it even more terrifying. This thing, this being, had feelings. Rituals. Memory. And it had fooled everyone. Including her. When it was done, it reached down, picked up the skin, and began the slow, deliberate process of putting it back on. Like clothing. Like armor. Piece by piece, the monster vanished, hidden again beneath the shell of a man. The face she kissed every morning. The arms that held her at night. Amina watched as her husband, her not husband, stood once more in human form, stretched his limbs, and began to walk back toward the village. Only when he disappeared into the darkness did she allow herself to exhale. Her legs gave out. She collapsed into the brush, trembling uncontrollably. Her mind was screaming, spinning, trying to make sense of what she'd seen. He wasn't human. Or maybe, he wasn't only human. Tears stung her eyes. Her thoughts spun. Every moment of tenderness, every whispered promise, was it real? Was it all a trick? Or was there still a sliver of truth behind the mask? She didn't know. All she knew was that she had seen something she was never meant to see. Something ancient. Something bound to the forest. And now that she knew, she couldn't pretend anymore. Amina sat there for what felt like hours, the forest slowly coming back to life around her. An owl hooted in the distance. A breeze whispered through the leaves as if the woods themselves were sighing. Eventually she stood. Her legs wobbled beneath her, but she steadied herself. She turned back toward the village, heart heavy, mind broken open. She had a decision to make. Run and never look back? Or return, sleep beside the thing she married, and try to understand the truth behind the skin. Amina barely slept that night. Her body returned to the cabin, but her soul lingered somewhere between fear and disbelief. She lay beside the hunter, her husband, pretending to rest while every breath he took beside her felt like thunder in her ears. His skin was warm, familiar. But she couldn't forget the other skin, the one that had hung loose and lifeless in the forest. The one he had peeled away with eerie ease. Morning came slowly, golden light creeping in through the cracks in the wooden walls. The man stirred beside her, stretching, yawning like any husband would after a long night. He smiled at her, warm and lazy, his eyes glinting with affection. But she couldn't smile back. She watched him go about his morning rituals, chopping firewood, feeding the animals, humming low tunes under his breath. He looked so normal, so human. And yet, Amina knew better now. Later that day, as the shadows grew long and the forest began to whisper its nightly secrets, the hunter returned to the edge of the woods, alone, or so he thought. Amina followed. She stayed hidden behind a boulder, heart racing, waiting for him to cross that invisible line where day surrendered to night and man gave way to monster. But tonight was different. He didn't remove his skin. Not yet. He sat beneath the same ancient tree, eyes closed, hands pressed to the earth. And then, softly, he began to speak, not to anyone in particular, just to the wind, the trees, maybe even to the darkness itself. I never wanted to love her, he said. His voice was low, raw. That wasn't part of the bargain. Amina's breath caught. I was supposed to take a bride, he continued. Not find one. The deal was simple. Walk as a man by day, return as beast by night. Until the bond was complete. He paused, his fingers tracing lines in the dirt. His next words came slowly. But she was different. She believed in the good in me. She loved me. And I. He choked. I began to forget who I was. Amina trembled behind her hiding place. She had loved him. She had dreamed of a life with him. But now she realized her heart had been offered to something not entirely human. Something that had walked into her world with purpose. A dark purpose rooted in ancient, inescapable law. I was born not of woman, he said, but of the river's breath and the forest's grief. A spirit without form, given flesh only when the old gods required it. He looked up, eyes glowing faintly in the dusk. They called me hunter because that's what I was made to be. A collector of souls. A tracker of hearts. The wind stirred the trees around him. Leaves fluttered like whispers. The curse began long ago, he continued, when I defied the laws of nature to save a dying woman in the woods. A mortal who begged for her life. I spared her and in doing so broke the balance. The spirits punished me. Gave me a face, a name, a body. He looked down at his hands as if disgusted by them. They made me live among men where their skin feel their pain. I could no longer drift between worlds. I was trapped. And the only way to break the curse, he exhaled, was to make one fall in love with me willingly, bind a soul to mine. Then, and only then, could I shed the skin forever. Amina's mind raced. It had all been a game, a test, a trap. Her heart was the key. Her love the spell. But something changed, he whispered. I never thought it would be real. That she would be real. He rose to his feet, walking slowly to the tree's roots. I watched her every day. Noticed how she smiled at birds, how she wept when the old man died, how she forgave even when others would not. I began to want what I should not have. His voice cracked. I began to believe I was human. Amina felt tears sting her eyes. He hadn't just tricked her. He had tricked himself. But the spirits? He said, they're watching. Waiting. If I break the terms, they will not forgive me again. I cannot have both love and freedom. Only one. And if I choose her, I remain cursed. If I choose freedom, I lose her forever. A long silence fell over the forest. And then he did it, he peeled off the skin again. But not with pride this time. Not with purpose. With sorrow. His true form emerged, twisted and pained, like a soul being torn open. Amina stepped from behind the boulder. He turned sharply, startled, but didn't run or hide. He simply stared at her, those glowing eyes wide with grief. You heard, he said quietly. She nodded. They stood there, silence stretching between them like an invisible veil. Why me? She finally asked, her voice trembling. Why me? He hesitated. Because you loved without reason. You gave without demand. And because the spirits knew I would fall for you. Her chest ached. Every memory they'd shared now wore a darker shadow. Every kiss, every touch, how much of it had been real? You used me, she said, her voice cracking. I needed you, he replied. At first. But then I wanted you. And that was never supposed to happen. Amina turned away, tears streaming freely now. So what happens now? The creature was silent for a long time. Then, softly, that depends on you. She looked back at him. What do you mean? If you choose to stay with me knowing what I am, the bond will be complete. My curse will lift. But I will lose what little of this form remains. I will never look like him again. I will be what you saw in the woods, forever. And if I walk away? You break the spell. I remain trapped. A man by day, a beast by night, until time forgets me. Amina's soul trembled with the weight of the choice. She had dreamed of love but never like this. She had longed for magic but not at this price. Now she was no longer just a bride. She was the keeper of fate. The forest called to her again, but this time, Amina walked with purpose. The trees no longer towered over her in menace. They stood like ancient witnesses, their leaves whispering warnings she no longer feared. She had faced the truth. Now she had to end it. In her hand, she carried a bundle wrapped in cloth, items passed down from her grandmother, once dismissed as charms of an old woman's superstition. Ashes from the hearth of a pure heart. A silver thorn said to pierce illusions. A bone pendant inscribed with runes known only to the elders. Symbols of resistance. Tools of memory. Night had already fallen when she stepped beyond the last tree of the village. The stars above blinked faintly through a veil of clouds. The forest welcomed her with its eerie hush. Somewhere deep inside it waited, the creature, the man, the broken spirit she once called husband. Each step echoed with ghosts of memory, their wedding, his smile, the gentle way he once touched her cheek. But she no longer mourned what she had lost. She mourned what never truly was. It didn't take long. He stood at the base of the old twisted tree, the same place she had first seen him shed his skin. He looked as she remembered, tall, strong, still wearing the man's form. But now she could see it clearly, the seams, the shimmer of the illusion that cloaked the truth. His eyes were too sharp. His smile too still. You returned, he said quietly. I came to end this, Amina replied. He took a step forward. You don't have to fight me. You loved me once. That was real. No, she said, voice hardening. What was real was me. You were a dream wrapped in a lie. I loved the man you pretended to be. Not the creature standing in front of me. His face twitched. The illusion began to flicker, and for a moment, his skin rippled, revealing the gnarled texture of the spirit underneath. You still don't understand, he growled. This curse, it binds us both. I didn't choose it. I was a guardian once. A protector of these woods. I gave myself to the forest in exchange for peace, but peace never came. Only hunger. Loneliness. Until I found you. You found a victim, Amina snapped. You wanted me to be your salvation, but you never asked if I wanted to be saved. His anger surged. The forest darkened, shadows stretching like claws. You came back to fight me then? His voice was no longer human. Do you think those charms can protect you? She opened the cloth and held the bone pendant high. It glowed faintly in the moonlight, casting a circle of warmth around her. I came with the strength of those who came before me. The women who fought. The women who saw. The women who survived. He snarled and his form dropped. The man melted away. What remained was a towering thing, half beast, half tree, with antlers that pulsed like roots and a body of twisted bark and flesh. Its eyes glowed with green fire. You think you can break me? It roared. Amina stood her ground. She felt fear, yes, but behind it was something stronger. Resolve. You are not a god. You are not my fate. You are a wound pretending to be a home. The creature lunged. She threw the silver thorn with all her strength. It struck the creature's chest, not to kill but to reveal. A burst of light exploded from the impact, tearing through the illusion. The forest trembled. The creature screamed, a sound like trees splitting, thunder cracking. Amina fell to her knees, clutching the bone pendant as the air thickened with ancient magic. You cannot destroy what you loved, the creature cried. No, she whispered. But I can set it free. She began to chant, not words she had learned, but ones that came from deep within her, older than memory, older than fear. A language of blood and earth, of mothers and daughters. A spell not of violence but of severance. The creature writhed, tendrils of mist rising from its skin. It reached for her but could not pass the circle of light. You were never mine, she said softly. And I was never yours. A final flash of energy erupted from the pendant, the ashes burning white-hot. The creature let out one last, echoing howl, and then it began to crumble. The bark split. The roots withered. The light inside it dimmed. And then only a pile of skin remained at the base of the tree. Empty. Hollow. Like an old coat left behind by someone long dead. Silence fell over the forest. Amina stood slowly, breath ragged. She stepped forward, kneeling by the skin. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. May you find peace in the place beyond this one, she whispered. The wind stirred, carrying the final remnants of the spirit away like ash. When she returned to the village, the dawn was breaking. She passed through the fields, through the elder's courtyard, and back to her home without a word. People watched. They saw the change in her eyes. The weight. The wisdom. And though they asked, she told no one what had happened in the forest. Some things she knew were meant to be lived, not spoken. But the forest would remember. And so would she. The moon hung heavy over the forest like an unblinking eye, silver light cutting through the leaves as Amina stood frozen between what was and what could never be. Her heart thundered inside her chest, louder than the crickets that had once sung through the trees but had long since gone quiet. Across from her stood the creature, no longer the man she'd loved, but the twisted spirit that had worn his skin. The forest air was thick with unseen magic, with the ancient sorrow of things bound and broken. Amina could taste it on her tongue, the bitterness of betrayal, the ache of illusion unraveling. Her husband, if she could still call him that, watched her, those glowing eyes flickering with something like longing, or maybe hunger. It was hard to tell. You know the truth now, he said softly, voice echoing unnaturally between the trees. There is no more deception between us. She didn't answer. I did not choose to be this, he continued. But I did choose you. And you tricked me, Amina said finally, her voice sharp with the sting of pain. You lured me into your life, made me believe you were someone you're not. I was that man when I was with you. She shook her head. No. You wore him like a costume. You made me love a lie. The creature stepped closer, and the shadows around him bent in strange ways. That lie was the most human part of me. For a moment, she saw the face of the man she had fallen in love with, the gentle smile, the warm eyes. But it was a mask just like before. And now she knew better. He raised one clawed hand, slowly as if reaching for her. You can still have him. I can still be him. If you choose to stay, the bond will be complete. I will be freed from this curse, and you will become one of us. One of you. Her voice faltered. Bound to the forest. Eternal. No more pain. No more aging. You'll walk the woods as a spirit beside me. Beautiful. Powerful. Fear. You'll never have to feel human sorrow again. It was a tempting offer, delivered like a lover's vow. And yet, all Amina could feel was the chill crawling up her spine. She stepped back. And what would I have to give up? He hesitated. Everything, he admitted. Your name. Your village. Your past. The sun. The wind. You'd forget the feel of sand beneath your feet. You'd forget your mother's songs. You'd forget what it is to bleed. Amina's eyes filled with tears. All her life, she had longed for escape. She had dreamed of a love that would carry her far beyond the limits of her quiet village. She had imagined adventure, a story worth telling. And now she had found it, but the cost was her soul. You wanted me to love you, she said bitterly. But you never asked if I wanted to be yours. He blinked slowly. Would you rather return to that empty life? Cooking. Washing. Dying a quiet death under the weight of tradition? You deserve more than that. No, she said, standing straighter now. I deserve truth. I deserve love without chains. And you deserve to remain cursed for trying to steal it. His face twisted, hurt flashing across his features. You don't have to be afraid of me, Amina. I'm not, she said. Not anymore. Something shifted in the air, an ancient wind rustling through the trees, like the forest itself was listening. She turned from him and began to walk, heart pounding, legs weak. You'll never make it out, he growled behind her. The forest will close in. It will protect me. But she didn't stop. She remembered the teachings of the elders. The old stories whispered at night. How to walk between the trees without disturbing their spirits. How to listen for the sound of the earth's breath. How to find your way when everything was watching. She lit a fire from her pocket flint, holding it high as she walked. Fire was life. Fire was memory. And the forest feared what burned too brightly. Behind her, the creature howled, more animal now than man. Shadows moved in the corners of her eyes, Branches reached like arms, but she pressed on. She whispered her mother's lullabies. She remembered the taste of her village's yam stew. She recited the names of her ancestors under her breath, each one anchoring her to herself. The forest twisted, trying to confuse her, but she dropped pieces of her torn shawl as markers, just as the elders had once taught children to do if they were ever lost. Hours passed. Maybe days. Time became nothing but the beat of her heart and the sound of her footsteps. And then, light. Faint, golden like the first breath of dawn. She pushed through the final thicket and stumbled into the edge of the village. People gasped. Children screamed. Elders ran forward, their staffs pounding the earth. She collapsed into their arms, filthy, shaking but alive. Later, as she sat wrapped in blankets, surrounded by the murmurs of those who had feared her lost, she told her story. Not all believed her. Some thought the grief of love lost had made her mad. But the elders? They listened with wide eyes and solemn silence. And when she finished, they nodded. Some spirits, one said, do not come with fangs and fire. Some come with promises. Amina said nothing. She only stared out toward the dark line of trees. She had escaped the forest. But not without scars. Not without knowledge. And not without a part of her soul forever altered. That night, she dreamt not of love or adventure, but of walking alone under a moonless sky, whispering the name of a man who never truly existed. And deep in the forest something howled. Not with anger, but with sorrow. Amina returned to the village, her heart a quiet storm of mixed emotions. The sun had not yet risen, casting a pale light over the fields and the narrow dirt roads, which seemed strangely still in the early hours of the morning. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic, heart-pounding night she had just lived through. Her body, once filled with dread and confusion, now pulsed with something else: strength, clarity, and a sharp, painful wisdom. As she walked through the familiar paths, the villagers noticed her. Her head was no longer held in innocence, nor was her smile filled with naive hope. No, Amina's eyes now carried the weight of something they couldn't comprehend, something ancient and terrifying. She had crossed the threshold, seen the truth that lurked in the shadows, and survived. And though they didn't speak, they all felt it, the quiet change in her presence, a shift from the young bride who once dreamt of love and adventure to the woman who had faced the horrors of the forest and emerged, forever altered. Whispers followed her steps, cautious glances cast in her direction, a mixture of awe and fear. She could feel their eyes on her, but she kept her gaze straight ahead, determined not to be broken. She had left the village as a bride, but she returned as something else, something no one had ever expected. Amina did not go to the elders first, nor did she seek comfort from her childhood home. She walked straight to the river, the very one that had once been the boundary between the world she knew and the world of nightmares. The river was now eerily calm, its waters flowing quietly, as if it too had been forever changed. She knelt by its edge, her fingers brushing the surface, but her thoughts were elsewhere, far beyond the peaceful ripples before her. The villagers began to notice the changes in her, the air of quiet strength she exuded. Where once there had been an innocent bride, there was now a woman who had glimpsed the terrifying heart of the world, and had chosen not to be consumed by it. She had faced the creature in the forest, had unraveled the dark truth behind the hunter's curse, and had emerged not only with her life but with something more precious: her freedom. Yet, despite her freedom, Amina felt the scars of her ordeal pressing against her soul. The hunter's voice, the whispers of the creature, the eyes that burned with unnatural fire, they haunted her in quiet moments, creeping into her dreams like tendrils of darkness. But she had learned something in the depths of that night. Fear could not be the ruler of her life anymore. She could no longer live as a victim of her circumstances, nor could she let the shadow of the past keep her bound to a life of silence. She had faced the truth, and now she would not let it drown her. Instead, she would use it. The villagers began to look at her differently. No longer just the woman who had married the mysterious hunter, Amina was now seen as a symbol, one of survival, of resilience in the face of darkness. Where once the village had looked at her with curiosity, they now saw her as someone who had lived through what they dared not even speak of. She became a living legend, one whispered about in the shadows, admired from afar, yet feared for what she had seen. They didn't quite understand her transformation, they couldn't, but they knew she had seen things that had changed her forever. She had ventured into the dark and returned with the strength to face it. For many that made her something of a cautionary tale, but for others, it made her something more. Amina's days were filled with new purpose. She had come back not as a broken woman, but as a teacher, a guide, someone who could help the village navigate the shadowy paths that lay in wait for the unsuspecting. The elders, who had once guarded the village's traditions and secrets, now looked to her as someone with knowledge beyond the ordinary, someone who had seen the very essence of the world they feared and lived among. They trusted her advice, and in return, Amina gave them something they had lacked: a perspective unclouded by fear. Her primary focus, however, became the younger women of the village, those who, like her once had, dreamt of love and adventure without understanding the dangers that lay hidden beneath the surface. Amina shared her experiences with them, not to frighten them but to warn them. She spoke of trust, of the deceptive nature of appearances, and of the importance of listening to one's instincts over the promises of those who might seek to trap them. She spoke of love, but not the kind of love that consumed and blinded. Rather, she spoke of self-love, of the strength that comes from knowing one's worth and not relying on someone else to define it. Slowly, over the years, Amina's teachings began to take root. The village, once a peaceful, isolated place, became one of quiet wisdom. People didn't speak openly of the hunter's curse anymore, not out of fear, but because they now understood that some things were better left unspoken, lingering only as lessons from the past. Amina had taught them that life was full of dangers, but also that it was possible to face them head-on and emerge stronger, wiser, and unbroken. Still, despite the wisdom she shared, there was always something ethereal about Amina. She had seen the world in ways others never would, and though she now walked in the light, a part of her would always remain in the shadows. She was no longer the innocent girl who had fallen for a man's promises, nor was she the naive bride who had dreamed of escape. She was something more, something that walked the fine line between the human and the supernatural, a bridge between two worlds. The villagers would often find her by the river, sitting on its banks in quiet contemplation. Sometimes she would speak to the water as though it understood, her voice soft and reverent. It was as if she were still connected to that dark world, the one where monsters wore human skin, but now instead of fear she spoke with a quiet acceptance. She had learned to live with the darkness, to respect it, but never to let it consume her. And so, the village of Amina's life went on. The whispers of her past, of the man she once married, faded into the stories told around fires, recounted by the elders who remembered her as the girl who escaped the hunter's curse. But for Amina, it was no longer just a story. It was her legacy. She had become a part of the village's folklore, a warning and a lesson wrapped in the truth of the forest. Amina was no longer just a survivor. She was a legend in her own right. And through her, the village would never forget. Sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones that hide in plain sight. But also that even in the darkest corners of life, there is always a way to break free, to find strength, and to survive. As the tale of Amina unfolds, we are left with a powerful reflection on the theme of deception and the hidden truths that often lie beneath the surface, not only in relationships but in life itself. The story of the hunter, who was in reality a shape-shifting creature bound by a dark curse, serves as a stark reminder that things are not always as they seem. In Amina's case, the man she thought she loved, the man she married, was a carefully crafted illusion. His exterior was that of a kind and loving husband, but underneath, there lurked something monstrous, something that had been carefully concealed, waiting for the moment when the truth would be exposed. The deception in Amina's story is not just about the physical transformation of her husband into a creature of the forest, but about the emotional and psychological layers that are often hidden beneath the surface in many aspects of life. How often do we see people or situations that appear perfect, only to later reveal their true, darker nature? This story teaches us that sometimes, what we think we know is far from the truth. It urges us to question appearances and to dig deeper into the things we hold dear. Amina was blinded by the idealized image of the perfect life that she dreamed of, but as she discovered, idealized love can often mask the most dangerous of truths. One of the central themes of this story is the importance of listening to warnings. Throughout the tale, there are multiple moments where the villagers, the elders, and even her own instincts try to warn Amina about the hunter. The elders' stories about shapeshifters, the villagers' whispers of distrust, and her own growing sense of unease were all signs that something was not right. However, Amina, caught up in her own desires and dreams, chose to ignore these warnings. She was so captivated by the idea of love and escape that she couldn't see the dangers lurking in the shadows. This blind trust in the illusion of love is a powerful reminder that we must be aware of the warning signs in our own lives, whether they come from others or from within ourselves. We are often given the opportunity to listen, to notice the subtle clues, but it is up to us whether we choose to act on them or ignore them. The story also underscores the significance of trusting one's intuition. Amina's initial doubts about the hunter's strange behavior were her intuition speaking to her, but she dismissed it in favor of a dream of escape and a life full of love. In our own lives, we too have moments when we feel something isn't quite right, but we often choose to ignore it. Whether it's a relationship, a job, or a situation that doesn't sit well with us, we have a tendency to convince ourselves that it's just our imagination or overthinking. Yet, Amina's journey is a powerful reminder that intuition is not just a fleeting feeling. It's our subconscious picking up on things we cannot yet fully understand. Had Amina listened to her instincts, she might have avoided the tragic turn her life took. What is particularly poignant in Amina's story is how it reflects the universal truth that idealized love can sometimes blind us to the deeper, darker elements that exist in our lives. Love is often portrayed as pure and transformative, but the reality is that love can sometimes be manipulative, possessive, and dangerous when left unchecked. The hunter's love, though cloaked in tenderness and promises of a better life, was ultimately a trap, a way to keep Amina tied to his curse. It was not the love of a man, but the manipulation of a creature that sought to use her for its own ends. In our own lives, it's important to remember that love, while beautiful, is not immune to deception. We must always question whether the love we receive is healthy, reciprocal, and genuine, or if, like Amina, we are being lured into something much darker than we can imagine. So, when we look back at Amina's experience, we realize that the core lesson of this story is about the danger of ignoring the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. Amina's eventual choice to confront the hunter, to challenge the deception and break free from the hold he had on her, is the defining moment of the story. It speaks to the power of self-liberation, of recognizing when something is toxic and choosing to fight back, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Her strength, in the end, was not just about defeating the creature but about reclaiming her autonomy, her voice, and her freedom. As viewers, we are left to ponder the closing question: would you have seen the truth, or would you have been consumed by the darkness? This question forces us to confront our own relationship with deception and trust. Would we have been able to see through the hunter's illusion? Would we have ignored the warnings in favor of love and escape? Or would we have followed Amina's path, breaking free from the darkness and seeking the truth, no matter the cost? These are questions that challenge us to reflect on our own lives and the ways in which we sometimes blind ourselves to the truth, whether in our relationships, our careers, or our personal beliefs. Amina's journey is not just a dark folktale. It is a metaphor for the struggles we all face when we are confronted with deception. It teaches us that while there may be darkness in the world, there is always a way to break free, to see the truth, and to reclaim our power. The story encourages us to trust ourselves, to listen to our intuition, and to not be blinded by the idealized images that others or society may project onto us. We must be willing to face the truth, no matter how ugly or terrifying it may be, because only then can we truly be free. If you found Amina's story as captivating as I have, make sure to like, comment, and share this video with others who love exploring the eerie and the unknown. Don't forget to subscribe for more dark folktales and mysterious tales from the depths of folklore. Until next time, remember, not everything is as it seems, and the truth is often buried beneath layers of deception. Stay curious, stay cautious, and never stop questioning.